Welcome. Today, we're diving into how rent increases are regulated. Whether you're a tenant or a landlord, understanding these rules is crucial. Rent regulation exists to protect tenants from sudden, steep rent hikes and to ensure housing remains affordable. Different regions have their own systems, but the goal is similar: to balance the rights of property owners with the needs of renters. In this video, we'll break down the basics of rent regulation, the types of laws in place, and what both tenants and landlords should know. Let's start by looking at why rent regulation matters in the first place. Rent regulation is designed to prevent housing from becoming unaffordable for ordinary people. Without rules, landlords could raise rents sharply, forcing tenants to move or face financial hardship. Regulations help create stability in the rental market, making it easier for families to plan their budgets and stay in their homes. They also discourage speculative practices that can drive prices up. By setting limits on how much and how often rent can increase, these laws aim to keep communities stable and diverse. There are several types of rent regulation, each with its own approach. The most common are rent control and rent stabilization. Rent control typically sets a maximum amount landlords can charge and limits increases to a fixed percentage or amount. Rent stabilization, on the other hand, allows for annual increases, but usually ties them to inflation or a government-set guideline. Some areas also have vacancy decontrol, where rents can be reset when a tenant moves out. Understanding these types helps you know what protections or obligations you might have. Rent control is one of the oldest forms of rent regulation. Under rent control, the government sets a cap on how much landlords can charge for rent and how much they can increase it each year. These rules often apply to older buildings or those built before a certain date. The idea is to protect long-term tenants from being priced out of their homes. However, rent control can also limit a landlord's ability to cover rising costs, which is why it's often a topic of debate. Rent stabilization is a more flexible approach than rent control. It allows landlords to raise rents, but only by a certain percentage each year, often linked to inflation or a government index. This system aims to balance tenant protection with the need for landlords to maintain their properties and keep up with costs. Rent stabilization often covers newer buildings or those not eligible for strict rent control. It's a common system in many large cities. Vacancy decontrol is a policy that allows landlords to reset the rent to market rates when a tenant moves out. This means that while a tenant is living in the unit, their rent is regulated, but once they leave, the landlord can charge a new tenant whatever the market will bear. This approach is meant to encourage landlords to maintain their properties and to allow for some flexibility in the rental market. However, it can also lead to higher rents over time as units turn over. The way rent increases are calculated depends on local laws. In some places, increases are tied to the Consumer Price Index, CPI, which measures inflation. In others, a rent board or government agency sets the allowable percentage each year. Landlords must follow these guidelines and usually have to provide written notice before raising the rent. This process ensures that increases are predictable and fair, giving tenants time to adjust their budgets. Most rent regulation laws require landlords to give tenants advance notice before increasing the rent. The amount of notice varies by location, but it's often 30 to 90 days. This gives tenants time to decide whether to accept the new rent, negotiate, or look for another place to live. Notice must usually be in writing and include details about the new rent amount and when it will take effect. Failing to provide proper notice can make the increase invalid. Rent regulation often limits how often landlords can raise the rent. In many places, increases are allowed only once per year. This rule helps tenants plan their finances and prevents landlords from making multiple small increases in a short period. Some areas may allow more frequent increases if the tenant agrees or if there are major improvements to the property. But these are exceptions rather than the rule. There are some exceptions to rent increase limits. For example, if a landlord makes significant improvements to a property, such as installing a new roof or upgrading heating systems, they may be allowed to raise the rent by more than the usual amount. These exceptions are meant to encourage landlords to invest in their properties while still protecting tenants from unreasonable increases. However, landlords usually need approval from a rent board or local authority before making such increases. Many cities and states have rent boards or similar agencies that oversee rent regulation. These boards set allowable increase rates, review landlord requests for exceptions, and handle tenant complaints. They play a key role in making sure the rules are followed and that both tenants and landlords are treated fairly. If you have questions or disputes about rent increases, the rent board is often the place to start. Rent regulation laws are designed to protect tenants from sudden or excessive rent hikes. These protections include limits on how much and how often rent can be increased, requirements for advance notice, and the right to challenge illegal increases. Tenants also have the right to a safe and habitable home, and landlords can't use rent increases as a way to force tenants out unfairly. Knowing your rights is the first step to staying protected. Landlords also have rights and responsibilities under rent regulation. They are entitled to a fair return on their investment and can raise rents within the legal limits. However, they must follow all notice requirements and cannot retaliate against tenants who exercise their rights. Landlords are also responsible for maintaining the property and making necessary repairs. Following the rules helps avoid disputes and keeps the rental relationship professional. If a tenant believes a rent increase is illegal, they have the right to challenge it. This usually involves filing a complaint with the rent board or local housing authority. The agency will review the case, and if the increase is found to be unlawful, it can be reversed. Tenants should keep records of all communications and notices, as these can be important evidence in a dispute. Landlords who violate rent regulation laws can face penalties. These may include fines, being required to refund overcharged rent, or even losing the right to rent out the property. Penalties are meant to deter illegal behavior and ensure that the rules are taken seriously. Both tenants and landlords should be aware of the consequences of breaking the law. Rent regulation laws vary widely from place to place. Some cities have strict rent control, while others have no regulations at all. It's important to know the rules in your area, as they determine your rights and responsibilities. Local government websites or tenant advocacy groups are good sources of information. Always check the latest laws before signing a lease or raising the rent. In recent years, many regions have updated their rent regulation laws in response to rising housing costs. Some have expanded protections for tenants, while others have loosened restrictions to encourage new construction. Staying up to date with these changes is important, as they can affect your rights and obligations. News outlets and official government sources are good places to find the latest updates. Rent increases can have a big impact on tenants. Even small increases can strain a household budget, especially in expensive cities. For some, a rent hike may mean having to move or cut back on other expenses. That's why regulations are so important. They help keep housing affordable and prevent displacement. If you're facing a rent increase, it's important to know your rights and explore your options. Rent regulation also affects landlords. While it limits how much they can increase rents, it also provides stability by reducing tenant turnover. Landlords can plan for steady income and may benefit from long-term tenants who care for the property. However, strict regulations can make it harder to cover rising costs, so it's important for landlords to understand the rules and plan accordingly. Let's look at a simple example of how a rent increase might be calculated under regulation. Suppose the law allows a 3% increase per year. If your current rent is $1,000, the maximum new rent would be $1,030. Landlords must use the allowed percentage and apply it to the current rent, not just pick a number. This formula ensures transparency and fairness for both parties. Many rent regulation systems set a cap on how much rent can increase each year. This cap is often a fixed percentage, such as 2% or 5%, or tied to inflation. The cap provides predictability for tenants and helps landlords plan their finances. It's important to check your local laws to know what the cap is in your area. Inflation is a key factor in many rent regulation systems. When the cost of living goes up, rent caps may be adjusted to allow for higher increases. This helps landlords keep up with rising expenses while still protecting tenants from sudden spikes. Rent boards often review inflation data each year to set the new allowable increase. A typical rent increase notice includes the current rent, the new rent, the percentage increase, and the date the new rent takes effect. For example, a notice might say, your current rent is $1,000. Effective July 1, your new rent will be $1,030, a 3% increase. Notices must be clear and delivered in writing, usually by mail or email. When a lease is up for renewal, landlords may propose a rent increase. The new rent must still follow all regulation rules, including caps and notice requirements. Tenants can choose to accept the new terms, negotiate, or move out. It's important to review the lease carefully and understand your rights before making a decision. In most cases, landlords cannot raise the rent during the term of a fixed lease unless the lease specifically allows it. Rent increases usually take effect at the end of the lease term. If the lease is month to month, landlords can raise the rent with proper notice, but still must follow regulation limits. Always check your lease for specific terms. When a new tenant moves in, the landlord may be able to set the rent at the current market rate, especially if vacancy decontrol applies. After that, any increases must follow regulation rules. This system allows landlords to adjust to market conditions while still protecting tenants once they move in. Rent regulation is a key tool for maintaining affordable housing in cities with high demand. By limiting rent increases, These laws help ensure that people of all income levels can find a place to live. Affordable housing programs often work alongside rent regulation to provide additional support for low-income tenants. Gentrification can lead to rising rents and displacement of long-term residents. Rent regulation helps slow this process by limiting how much rents can increase, making it harder for landlords to push out existing tenants in favor of higher-paying newcomers. While not a complete solution, rent regulation is an important tool for preserving community stability. Some critics argue that strict rent regulation can discourage new construction, as developers may worry about limited returns. To address this, many regions exempt new buildings from rent regulation for a certain number of years. This encourages investment in new housing while still protecting tenants in older units. Rent regulation can affect how landlords maintain their properties. If rent increases are too limited, landlords may struggle to cover maintenance costs. Many systems allow for higher increases if major repairs or upgrades are made, balancing tenant protection with the need for safe, well-maintained housing. Rent regulation laws often include protections against unfair evictions. Landlords can't evict tenants just to raise the rent beyond legal limits. Evictions must follow due process, and tenants have the right to challenge unlawful actions. These protections help keep tenants secure in their homes. Some rent regulation laws address subletting. Tenants may be allowed to sublet their units, but the rent charged to the subtenant must follow regulation rules. This prevents landlords or tenants from profiting by charging above the legal rent. Always check your lease and local laws before subletting. Adding roommates can affect rent regulation. In some cases, the total rent can't be increased just because more people are living in the unit. However, tenants must still follow occupancy rules and get landlord approval if required. Understanding these rules helps avoid disputes. Rent regulation may also cover utility charges. In some cases, landlords can only increase rent for utilities if allowed by law or the lease. Any increases must be clearly explained and follow regulation limits. Tenants should review their lease to see what's included and what can be changed. Security deposits are usually separate from rent regulation, but some laws limit how much can be charged. Increases in security deposits may also be regulated, especially if tied to rent increases. Tenants should know their rights regarding deposits and how they relate to rent changes. Some rent regulation laws require landlords to provide receipts for rent payments and increases. Receipts help tenants keep track of what they've paid and can be important evidence in disputes. Always ask for a receipt and keep it for your records. A rent roll is a record of all rents charged in a building. Rent regulation laws may require landlords to maintain and provide rent rolls to tenants or authorities. This ensures transparency and helps enforce the rules. Tenants can request a rent roll to check if their rent is in line with others in the building. Some areas require landlords to register rents with a government agency. This helps track compliance with regulation and provides a record for resolving disputes. Registration may be required annually or when a new tenant moves in. Failure to register can result in penalties. Tenants may have the right to see the rent history for their unit. This can help them determine if increases are legal and if the landlord is following the rules. Rent history is usually available from the rent board or housing agency. Knowing your unit's history can be a powerful tool in disputes. If a landlord charges more than the legal rent, tenants can file a complaint and may be entitled to a refund. Rent boards investigate overcharge claims and can order landlords to pay back excess amounts. Keeping good records is essential for proving your case. In some cases, tenants can request a rent reduction if the landlord fails to provide essential services or make repairs. Rent boards can order temporary or permanent reductions until the problem is fixed. This encourages landlords to keep properties in good condition. Rent regulation laws often work alongside anti-discrimination laws. Landlords cannot raise rents or refuse to rent based on race, gender, family status, or other protected characteristics. Tenants who face discrimination can file complaints with housing agencies or civil rights organizations. If you have questions or problems with rent increases, legal assistance is available. Tenant advocacy groups, legal aid organizations, and government agencies can provide advice and representation. Don't hesitate to seek help if you're unsure about your rights or need to challenge any legal increase. To sum up, rent regulation is a complex but important system that protects tenants from unfair rent increases and helps keep housing affordable. Understanding the rules in your area, knowing your rights, and keeping good records are the best ways to stay protected. Whether you're a tenant or a landlord, following the law benefits everyone and helps create stable, thriving communities. Thanks for watching. If you want to learn more about rent regulation, check your local government website or contact a tenant advocacy group. Staying informed is the best way to protect your rights and make smart decisions about housing. Remember, rent regulation is there to help create fair, stable, and affordable communities for everyone.